Welcome, class. Today we're going to be talking about something known as the Cold War. Yes, we're moving on past World War II. I'm going to first brief on a couple things. One is Yalta in February of 1945. I want you to remember this is the conference where FDR, Churchill, and Stalin all came together to discuss post-World War II Germany and Poland and Berlin specifically. There, they tried to discuss and come up with some kind of ideas to how we're gonna do post World War II. In turn, hopefully not creating another war. At the concluding of that conference, they discussed finally some of the boundaries, specifically with Poland. Kind of talked a lot about how they were going to specifically divide Germany. And in the dividing Germany, they came up with a couple conclusions. That was first in February of 1945. Then, after, we have VE Day in Potsdam is the next one. Potsdam took place in July of 1945. At Potsdam, remember, this is where the concluding of post-World War II first started to really take shape and take hold. This is Truman. His was his first big conference as now head of state, head of America. He was our representative from the United States. He met with Stalin, and there they tried to again discuss what was going to happen, what were going to be the boundaries of Germany. They concluded to dismember, split Germany up into 4 different sections: one for Great Britain, one for France, one for the United States, and then another one for the Soviet Union, or the USSR. The difference, as you'll see, is more of the western. So that the west side, you'll have the France, Britain, and United States. And then on the east is most likely where the Soviet Union and the communist government really started taking shape. Another thing, which is kind of going to be where we start picking up, is another one of the post-World War II outcomes was the developing of the United Nations. Here on slide 1. The United Nations was the group that came together, and here they tried to come up with some kind of way to end the war as a body, as one unit, to prevent future global wars. This was the United Nations was a group of leaders represented from different countries around the world to hopefully discuss the differences within a conference setting more than bringing up war, which is where this was really and truly very important. The next thing going on is the change in Japan, another one of the post-World War II outcomes. At Potsdam, actually it was at Yalta, this is where Stalin first starts telling the United States that he is going to join the efforts to end war with Japan, and he did. And then at Potsdam, Truman gets word that the atomic bomb was successfully tested, and there he tells Stalin. So as a result, after Potsdam, the United States drops 2 bombs on Japan. Those are known as the dropping of the fat man and little boy, that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in the country of Japan. After the bombs were dropped, after the second one, Japan then comes and unconditionally surrenders to the Allied forces. So one of the things that had to happen after post-World War II was we had to discuss how are we going to end Japan, what are we going to do with Japan. So for quite a few years, we decided to take on the American forces were occupying Japan. So Japan soon became known as occupied Japan. This is this is how it was going to be until they were able to self-govern themselves. They had to adopt a democratic form of government. This was consisted by MacArthur, who was in charge of the leading of the troops. And a lot of people, if you look back and if you have something that was made in Japan way back in the day, it would be, you might see it says occupied Japan. That was a United States occupied Japan territory. Going on, we talk about Europe. After World War II, we all know, whether you know the war or not, you know it lay in ruins. The war took place on many different theaters and fronts, and it took place in the Atlantic, the Pacific, but most likely a lot of it happened in Germany and around Germany. Like, for instance, around here you had the Battle of Normandy, you had Stalingrad, the Battle of the Bulge. You had these different battles that took place primarily within Germany itself. So it does lay in ruins and in a sense of dismay, and a lot of dismay. So this is a picture of kind of where Germany lay. And then after the Potsdam Conference, this is kind of how they divided Berlin up. They had the Soviet Union was given the largest bloc. Then it went to the American, the British, and the French. And the Soviet Union, if anything, were known as more of the winners, gaining the more territory. Eventually, it became really well known that Germany could be divided into two different areas. To the east, you would have communists, which lay in red, and to the west would be the democratic or the capitalist form of government. This is occupied by the French, the British, and the American territories. So as Potsdam and Yalta and the concluding of World War II started to take fold, this rapid tension between Stalin and the Americans and Stalin and the Allies really started to take fold. It started, Stalin began, people would say, coming up with more of these Hitler ideas, these Nazisms, was primarily the name that was kind of known. And it developed this tension between Stalin and the USSR and the Russia and the communist idea versus the capitalist idea and the Allies and this democratic form of government. So in turn, something known as the Cold War. If you ever think of something cold, it's usually frozen. And that is exactly pretty much where the Cold War gets its name, is it was a frozen war. You had the Soviet Union, who was a powerhouse in themselves. They were capable of producing massive weapons of destruction. Then you have the Americans, who again, on the same page, were producing mass destructive weapons. They proved that through the dropping of the bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So in the Cold War, you have these two nations who are capable of producing mass destruction, but they're frozen. Neither are attacking the other or anyone else. So it is known as the Cold War. It was the fear of them unfreezing. If you want to kind of define the Cold War in any way, the best way to do it is, the Cold War is basically a time period of 45 years approximately, where there was a true competition of values, a competition of capitalists versus communists, a competition of who can go to space first, the competition of who has the best technology, whose government, is it democracy, is it totalitarian, is it individual, is it socialist, is it market, is it communist, these ideas of groups or individuals, which one is better. Throughout the time period, if you want to kind of put it into play, it's the time period between the end of World War II and then until the collapse of the Soviet Union, which happened not until 1991. This is 8 presidents were known to go through it. Those presidents are Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, and then some more that we'll discuss in a little while. Throughout the Cold War, stakes are high. Both the United States and then the Soviet Union, the USSR, and they both have this capability to destroy each other. You have the atomic bomb from the Americans that we know that we dropped it, but then in 1949, the Soviet Union, they successfully explode their own A-bomb. And then you have in 1952, the first hydrogen bomb becomes tested. And that idea starts to come out. And then with these bombs and the H bombs were much more powerful than the atomic bombs that were dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And we have this ballistic missiles, this fear of a nuclear war taking on both. In all, if the nuclear war would have happened, it would have destroyed most likely all of mankind known to man. So after the concluding of Potsdam and Yalta, concluding of World War II, the groups came together, and the Allies specifically, they developed something known as NATO. NATO is known as the North Atlantic Treaty Organizations. This is a defense mechanism for the ally for to develop by allies. This is between the United States and the Western Europe. This was the first time that the United States have actually kind of entered this peacetime idea, this peacetime of military ideas. Most also, it's known as the Agreement of North America and Western European nations. This is the pledge to aid, if another country is attacked, that they will kind of have their back. So it was more of a backing system than anything. And this was NATO, and this was more of your democratic or capitalist type governments that would do this. On the flip side, we had something known as the Warsaw Pact. This was developed in 1950, and this was the defensive between the Soviet Union and the Eastern countries. So we have NATO, which is more for the United States and these Eastern countries, and then you have the Warsaw Pact, which is for the Soviet Union and the Eastern countries. So we have these green and purple kind of shades on here, and this is the tension that builds up throughout the entire Cold War, and this was kind of how they combated each other. So at the end of it all, we finally come across this idea of we need to develop some kind of way to stop communists. So this guy, who was known as Keenan, he comes in. So containment continuing. This idea was kind of an interesting concept. It developed out of after the end of the war. We had the Soviet Union, who was close society, and they were under this iron grip of Joseph Stalin. Few in the West had the experience with communist state, and fewer people were understanding exactly what was the communist ideas. So this man he got some knowledge of a foreign officer from the communist government. His name was George Kennan, and in 1946 he kind of came across a telegram. It soon became known as the Long Telegram, but in a nutshell, it talked on the aggressive nature of what was Stalin's ideas, what was his goals, and in the concluding, he kind of developed, saying, nonetheless, that if we want to stop it, we had to develop and create ourselves into an idea of containment. We had to not let the communists spread. We had to contain them within where they are, and eventually the idea was if they would crumble upon themselves. But we had to contain them and hold them out from getting anyone else for this to truly take hold. So to do that, we created a couple different things. The first one was the Truman Doctrine. This was President Truman kind of his idea that we have to help the free people to resist communists. Go in there and help these people so they don't want to turn to a communist nation, kind of like in Germany, where after World War I, they had no one else to go to but the communist ideas. So we wanted them to help the free people. That way they would stay on the democracy side. Another way was the Marshall Plan, and this was more of the financial rebuilding of Europe. This was the financial giving to help them make sure that they stay with our foreign policy. So the Marshall Plan was nonetheless the money part of the containment policy. Then after, to help kind of compile both Berlin, or to help both the Truman and the Marshall, we developed the Berlin Airlift. And the Berlin Airlift was basically, Berlin was split into 3 different sections, but to get anything into Berlin on the other side of the Iron Wall, we had to cross some kind of barrier. And the only way to get any form of aid to Berlin was to just simply drop, thousands of different supplies, food, and this was kind of help combat the blockade that was hurting West Berlin. And then going off that, we start hearing about the problems in Korea. So we're going to quickly talk about the different issues that are happening within Korea. Starting off with, they start going into the different areas, and this is where the Cold War starts taking shape. So in the next section, we're going to talk about the different areas that communism tried to take on.